Muy buenos días a todos. Mi nombre es Miguel Ángel Valero.
Good morning, I'm Miguel Ángel Valero, Director of TIAPAD, the State Referential Center of Personal Autonomy and Technical Aid, depending from INSERSO and from the Ministry of Health, Social Services and Equality. And we are going to start this first panel session, whose title, as you can see in the program, is New Horizons in Research. I would like to first say that we're not in a hurry. Sometimes we get certain delays when starting, but we will continue our rhythm, our pace, and we will recover timing. As you have seen in the program, in this panel, we have got the presence of three important researchers and experts on the topics that concern us today. First of all, to the far right, the systems engineer of La Laguna College, Leopoldo Acosta Sanchez, who's going to talk about autonomous cars and the Verdino project. Then we will have Mr. Robert Beckman, CEO from WICAP, United States, who's going to present the Brainport project. And the third person to my right is Brittany Perez, Associate Researcher of the Center for Inclusive Design and Accessibility of the Buffalo University in the United States. This session will last around 1 hour. So after this short presentation, each one of the speakers will have 10-12 minutes to present their project, so that in a panel format, we will afterwards have some time for a Q&A session. I would like to say, nevertheless, to express the idea that gathers us this morning. First of all, thanking you for your presence and the people through the internet that are following us, that when we talk about research, we always get that doubt of basic research, applied research, is that close to society? And I remember my beginnings when I was starting to teach at the college before being director of the TIAPAD. The Royal Academy of the Spanish Language defined research as carrying out intellectual and experimental activities, close to the usage context, in a systematic way to increase knowledge of a certain matter. And the approach of the research and development and innovation that this Congress has looks for that, to share through that systematic activity, real activity in the ground, better and bigger knowledges for the rest. But this roundtable is New Horizons in Research. So when I looked for a definition of horizons, the one included in the dictionary, I didn't like it because it was too geographical, and I was looking for something like more metaphorical. So I invented myself one, and I say that horizon, if we go to the beach or to a mountain, is that proves the limit of our vision, not only physically, but also of what we imagine. And it, apart from being a limit, it motivates us to overcome that limit with the time. And that's why the vision of this roundtable, three experts in three areas that are very relevant for the context that occupies us: accessibility, personal autonomy, technology for all, and focusing that beyond horizon. And lastly, in order to finish this introduction, when I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, the scientific committee of the DRT was thinking about domotics, robotics, and teleassistance. DRT is not just old, but that they had to do with similar works but different. So we started saying about D for design, inclusive design for domotics, R for robotics, becoming research networks. And today we've got robotics, and T of teleassistance, where we were looking at the group of elderly people, would become technology for all. So we include a greater, broader vision, preserving origins, but allowing greater connection points to the state of the art. I will now introduce each speaker, and I will do it in English because our speakers are English, so I will communicate directly to them, though you will be able to follow the interpretation into Spanish. Leopoldo Acosta Sanchez is a chairman, he sits the chair of the Laguna University since 1999, extraordinary professor for younger researchers in technological science, and he's interested on robotics, control engineering, and artificial intelligence, the basis of the work he's going to introduce. He has managed 9 PhD theses. He's got more than 100 articles published. He has worked in robotics as a main researcher in 5 projects of the R&D national plans for industrial conception and production, and he is member of the National Commission of Computing and Robotics. Thank you very much for your presence here. You have now the floor. Thank you, Miguel Angel. I'd like to start by thanking the invitation to be here from the ONCE Foundation, and more especially Jesus Hernandez and David Sanoletti. And secondly, I'd like to thank the trust they have placed on us to present this project, because they've seen their application possibilities in other scopes. Not only having seen those possibilities, but that have become a reality in the session of an electric wheelchair becoming an autonomous wheelchair. I would kindly ask the technicians to put the videos at the same time that I'm speaking. Well, the first thing that we have to say is that autonomous cars, more especially intelligent cars, is something which is very highly in fashion. In Spain, there are different research groups working on this topic, and worldwide also there are very powerful researchers in this field. But we're not working with autonomous cars that go through roads or highways. We're thinking about autonomous cars capable of running through pedestrian areas of major cities, closed urbanizations, airports, major commercial centers. What's the specificity of this kind of the environment? Well, we will need smaller vehicles, normally electrical vehicles, and in fact, Verdino is a golf cart, a golf buggy, and these kind of environments do not have got beacons, they are not signaled, but these are environments that we call unstructured. There are people, there can be buildings, references, but they are natural references. Therefore, these are more difficult to localize, these kind of references. Then the Verdino project has been developed under the umbrella of the National Plan for Research, Development and Innovation. We were also concerned to do something that could be applied. We wanted to have a technological transfer, and in that environment we were obsessed with costs. It's worthless to have a wonderful prototype if it's too expensive. Today, the prototype you see, the Verdino prototype, has got a cost between 10,000 and 15,000 euros. And in fact, it's our obsession to reduce that cost. So what is the most relevant feature of Verdino? Well, it's a sensorial system. I mean, those systems capable of identifying what is in the environment. And that system has got the same feature as we humans have. We've got many, many sources of information. In the case of Verdino, we've got cameras, laser telemeters, and we also have other sensors, some as well known as the Kinect. The Kinect device that is used for video gaming, but we use it to obtain information of the environment. And that has got an advantage, because if it's a sensor devoted to a wider audience, the cost of that sensor will be relatively lower. So thanks to that, we have a prototype which is more accessible. In fact, that system of sensors and that capacity of reacting to the environment has evolved all through the development of the prototype, and it has evolved because new products have come to the market and because we have discarded those centers that maybe were providing very good results but that were very expensive. And I think this is more or less the idea of what the Verdino prototype is. Well, thank you very much, Professor. As we were saying before, we're going to listen to the 3 presentations and then we'll have a Q&A session. The next speaker is Mr. Robert Beckman. Mr. Beckman.
And as President, CEO, and Chairman of the Board of Directors, he was recruited by the company founder Paul Bach and Rita after Dr. Bach Rita was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. Prior to joining YCAF, Mr. Beckman had served as a Director and Vice President Finance for Bone Care International from 2001 to 2003, as Vice President Finance and Chief Operating Officer of Lunar Corporation from 1986 to the year 2000. Mr. Beckman began his career as a member of the audit department of PMM & Co. in Chicago, Illinois. Mr. Beckman is a 1976 graduate of Lewis University in Lockport, Illinois, and currently serves as a trustee and chair of the Finance Committee for the university. Mr. Beckman is going to introduce us to the BrainPort project. Thanks, the floor is yours.
First, thank you very much. First, I want to say that the roots of our technology come from Spain because Dr. Bach-y-Rita, his father and mother, were born in Spain and they emigrated to the United States. So our roots come from your country. Dr. Bach-y-Rita famously said that we see with our brains and not with our eyes. And I want you to think about that for a minute. So this means that that eyesight actually takes place within the human brain. It does not take place in the eyes. Dr. Bach-y-Rita saw the eyes as a sensor, and if the sensor was damaged, then a substitute sensor, such as a video camera, could be used. Also, he taught us that the brain is not hardwired, so that if a person uses an artificial sensor or a camera sensor, that signal from the sensor can be relayed to the brain through an alternate sensory channel. In this case, we use the tongue as the alternate sensory channel. We are developing wearable technology for people who are profoundly blind. The first generation of our technology is already approved in Europe with the CE mark, in Canada, and just recently by the FDA in the United States. So this technology is becoming available to people. The current technology uses a camera mounted on a pair of Oakley sunglasses, connected to a hand controller device in which the user is able to change the controls, in effect change the level of stimulation on the tongue, and to change the zoom of the camera, change the contrast depending on lighting conditions. So all of these controls are conducted through a handheld controller. The technology is evolving though, and in a minute I would like to show you for the first time our next generation technology in which we have eliminated the handheld controller and placed all of the controls on the headset itself. But first, the first question that everybody asks is, what does it feel like? What does the signal feel like on your tongue? Well, it feels like tiny bubbles. It's certainly not painful. And every user is able to set the level of stimulation to correspond to a comfortable level. You don't get more information by setting it higher, and nobody feels any pain when they're receiving the stimulation. And I also like to say that it is similar to when you were a child, somebody would draw a picture on your back, and you would have to try to perceive what the person was drawing on your back simply by a tactile sense of that person drawing the picture on your back. Well, in a very real way, we are drawing a picture on your tongue. And people who are profoundly blind learn to interpret the signals on their tongue as the scene around them. It is, I tell people, I talk to prospective users all the time now, and I tell prospective users that this is more like learning a new language than it is like seeing again. So we try to set the expectations according to the reality of what we're able to portray to people. So people are able to do things such as perceive a sidewalk and perceive the edges of a sidewalk. People are able, in a controlled area such as an outdoor track, to walk on a track and stay within the lines of that track. Obviously, this is something that they could not otherwise do with, even potentially with a guide dog, but certainly not with a cane. People would not be able to stay within the lines of a track. My goal is to teach people who are blind to actually run on the track. This would be a very good form of safe exercise that I believe people who are blind should be able to enjoy. We have also played games such as using a dartboard and enabling a person who is profoundly blind from birth as a matter of fact, to be able to perceive the dartboard, throw the darts, and be able to also perceive that he has been able to hit the dartboard. A form of entertainment, which I think is just the beginning of the types of entertainment that people will learn to do with our device. The next generation of technology is the most exciting, though, and that is what I brought with me today. As I mentioned, all of the controls are on the headset, so now we've eliminated the need for the handheld controller. We did this because blind people who participated in our FDA study told us that they had one hand for the cane or the guide dog, and they wanted their other hand free. So what was most important to them was to eliminate the handheld controller. But this technology, similar to Google Glass, also has bone conduction technology so that we can convey the audio signal directly through the bone and not interrupt the hearing of the person who is blind. This was also important in terms of user groups that we talked to. They did not want to have their hearing blocked. They also did not want to have the audio signal broadcast so that other people in the room could hear it. They wanted the broadcast to be personal to them, which is accomplished with this technology. And then lastly, or also importantly, is the fact that we have wirelessly connected this device to mobile technology devices, such as your cell phone or a tablet device. What does that allow? So that allows us to incorporate sign technology similar to the sign technology that driverless cars are using. What this means is that in the first three examples, we are implementing men's restroom, women's restroom, and exit signs. This will enable people who are profoundly blind to tell the BrainPort that they are looking for the exit sign. And using computer algorithms, the technology will scan the scene conveyed by the video camera. If there's an exit sign in the scene, the device will communicate either audibly or potentially haptically to the person that the sign is in their field of view and provide navigation information so that they can independently navigate to that particular sign. We are developing the first three signs only as examples, and we intend to work with developers all over the world to implement additional signs of interest and other items of interest that can be utilized by the person who is profoundly blind to navigate to those items of interest or signs. I like to say that if driverless cars are possible, if people can drive from one city to the next completely without a driver in the car, then I believe also that blind people using technology should be able to do many of the same things that these driverless cars do, such as avoid collisions, read and interpret signs, and avoid obstacles. So this is our dream. But it's not just a dream. The first 3 signs will be available with this device next year. We expect to get regulatory clearance in both Europe and the United States in 2016. And then from there, we intend to greatly expand the technology to make the same type of technology that is available to driverless cars available to people who are profoundly blind. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Mr. Beckman. La siguiente ponencia.
The next guest speaker comes from United States, Mrs. Brittany Perez, PhD of the Washington University.
Occupational therapy at the Washington University in St. Louis of Medicine, 2013. Bachelor of Arts in Psychology at Washington University in St. Louis, 2009. Occupational therapies at the State of New York. Basic cardiac life support for the healthcare provider at the American Heart Association. Ms. Perez is an occupational therapy research associate at the Center for Inclusive Design and Environmental Access at the State University of New York at Buffalo. Occupational therapies per diem, supplemental healthcare, skilled nursing facility, and the project coordinator of usability testing of shuttle bus access at Champion Bus Co. and usability testing of ATM machines at Diebold INC. She's the author of quite a lot of important research papers, and we could mention as an example the role of occupational therapies in universal design research at Occupational Therapy Now, and also a global picture of spinal cord injury published at the International Perspective of Spinal Cord Injury, Geneva WHO Library. Thanks a lot. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And I want to thank the ONCE Foundation for inviting the IDEA Center here to Madrid. And on behalf of our director, Dr. Ed Steinfeld, we're very happy to be here to share our center and to learn about the different products and technologies in this field. We look forward to hopefully working with many people as a result of the conference. So thank you very much for having us. As you mentioned, I work at the University at Buffalo in the Department of Architecture and Planning, and our center is a Center for Inclusive Design and Environmental Access. We're a multidisciplinary center. Our director is a licensed architect, and we have other architects, human factors engineers, urban planners, and occupational therapists who work together in the research lab. Our primary role is doing federally funded research from the National Institute for Independent Living, Rehabilitation, and Disability Research. And we primarily do our research in the fields of universal design in the built environment and also accessible public transportation. Among the other activities that our group works with, we do consultations for various organizations throughout the United States on ADA compliance. The ADA is the Americans with Disabilities Act, and ensures that buildings in different environments follow the laws and regulations of our country to make sure they've done that well for participation in the environment. We also provide consultation to the same services for implementing universal design strategies. And I'll tell you a little bit more about how we define universal design and how we think that that promotes increased health and wellness and social participation in the environment. And lastly, we do services for home modifications where we can go into an individual's home and provide the recommended modifications to live more independently in the home. And we do education at conferences such as these around the world, teaching people about universal design and how that can be implemented in product development, in architecture, and also in service delivery, which is a field that I think is very relevant to tourism, that it's not just about the physical environment, but also the social environment where universal design is very important to include all people. And so a little bit about how we define universal design. You may be familiar with 7 principles of universal design, which was primarily defined first by Ronald Mace. And our director, Ed Steinfeld, worked closely with him to develop the 7 principles. And over time and involvement in research, realized that we need to modify the principles and expand the concept of universal design to include the evidence base, the literature that backs up why universal design is effective for increasing participation and health for all different kinds of people. So the definition that we use at the Idea Center is universal design is a process that enables and empowers a diverse population, improving human performance, health and wellness, and social participation. And the important part there is that it's a process. It's never quite finished. There can always be improvements for designing the environment and designing systems. And I feel like I'm preaching to the choir because this is why we're all here together today. And so the Idea Center developed the 8 goals of universal design. These include body fit, comfort, awareness, understanding, health and wellness, social participation, personalization, and cultural appropriateness. And through these 8 goals, there is evidence-based literature to show the best practices within each of those goals. At the beginning, looking at anthropometry and ergonomic measures, looking at improving health and wellness. There's large bodies of medical and health-related literature for people with and without disabilities. And then also to include the social participation body of literature and how environments and systems can increase participation for all people. And this environment is a really nice example of how everybody here is able to participate and learn together in the same place. So we're very excited to be here, and we look forward to learning more and talking about the different products and technologies that are being developed internationally, and perhaps we can work together on researching their effectiveness and in the future.
Thanks a lot. Thank you very much, Ms. Pérez. La verdad es que
Well, it's so easy to moderate such a table, such a round table. We've got 3 speakers that stick perfectly to timing, and so it's very easy to be specific, clear, and concise. So thank you, dear speakers. The second part of the panel is going to be a Q&A session, and it's now the turn of the moderator to break the ice, and I will make a question that I'd like to address to Professor Acosta, which has to do with the complex balance in the automated systems, such as the case of this system, which I don't know if it's the displacement, I don't know if it's a car, a chair, or buggy. But the question we would like to raise is, how can we find the balance between accessibility, feeling of control on behalf of the user, safety, and automatism? Because I can imagine that with the different people that you're testing and their different functional capabilities, I guess they will ask for personalization or tailor-made, but the system has to be reliable. We don't want to be controlled fully, but accessibility features have to be taken into account even since the beginning of the inclusive design. So that's why the question, how can you by using the artificial intelligence techniques, get the balance and commitments between the control of the user and the service of the machine? Well, it's a very good question. Well, difficult. Well, if you could put the video of La Laguna while I answer to this question. Out of the other two videos, the video where we see the prototype running in a pedestrian area, just this one. There's no audio. No, there's no audio.
In the current status of the prototype, what's really determinant for users, and indeed this is a very important issue, which is user experience, and that depends on the user that's experiencing the device. But a very important issue here is destination. Right now, what we do is we have a map, and with your mouse, you can just click on the place where you're headed to, your destination. The prototype is autonomous, so it can be a bit dangerous in some occasions. But about how to drive, well, indeed, we need to strike a balance between the most relevant issues, because right now, actually, what really rules the prototype is a planner that makes a series of decisions. And those decisions may lead you to go as fast as possible from one point to another. That's a decision, and that involves more aggressive driving. And indeed, this has happened. We put some users in a test, and in aggressive driving, some users said that was too much, it wasn't pleasant. That type of behavior can be improved. There's another aspect that we control, which is the safety area of the user. For instance, when the sensory system detects a pedestrian, it detects him or her in a certain location, but we can tell the system, listen, around that pedestrian, there's also a banned area. So the prototype will pass the pedestrian from a far distance or relatively far distance. And in that manner, we will decrease the possibility of having an accident, of collision. So there are many differences, because it's not the same to drive on a highway as it is to drive on a road, because your driving style is different, and it's different to drive in pedestrian areas. There will be many hurdles, many obstacles in that type of setting, and perhaps we will have to drive backwards to find an alternative route. So we need to strike a balance between the different factors so that indeed we can come up with a friendly prototype, and always thinking about the end user, of course. And sometimes the friendliness of the prototype is sometimes the gap that we still have to bridge, I'd say. I would like to give the floor now to the audience. Does anybody want to ask a question or make a remark for Dr. Acosta regarding this driverless car or this automated car? I think there's a question from the audience. Is there? No? Oh. Well, if it's not the case, yes? I'm sorry, I cannot hear you well from here. Okay, well, nevertheless, later on we'll have some more time for questions. So why don't we continue?
To ask Robert about the complexity of the tongue supported interaction, because a question is the following. Typically, a person with different physical or cognitive impairments or sensorial too has to face the challenge to choose the best interaction tool or the best multimodal approach according to the functional expectation. And the question is why using the tongue and the interaction benefit compared to other techniques by taking into account the typical complexity being able to control that tongue functionality to get the machine go ahead with the required orders. In other words, why the tongue compared with other techniques, and why did you start with this approach? As everybody know that there are other alternatives in the face control movements.
Well, first of all, we decided to use the tongue to convey the information from the camera because, in fact, the tongue is a very good conductor of electricity. The tongue is constantly moist. The environment, when there's no food in the mouth, is a very good environment for conducting electricity. And in fact, other areas of the body could be used, but you would have to provide a much stronger electrical current to convey the same amount of information. So it turns out that the tongue is actually a very good environment for conducting electricity. Now, you mentioned people with maybe cognitive disabilities, and I will admit to you that up until now, we have only studied our technology with people who are profoundly blind, and we tried to select people who were as strong as intellectually possible, because we're really we're investigating technology at the horizons, and we needed to be able to work with people who were at the very upper limit in terms of their own intellectual capacity. But recently we were awarded another U.S. federal government grant to study the technology in people who were blinded by traumatic injury. So we may include people who have cognitive disabilities also in the current study, which just got underway this September. But our goal is to make the technology as widely available as possible and useful by the whole spectrum of people who are profoundly blind.
Thank you. ¿Alguna otra persona en la sala quisiera hacer algo?
Does anybody else in the audience want to ask a question to Mr. Beckman? If it's not the case, we can move on with the next question.
Ms. Perez was talking about an interesting point, which is the extension or the further specification of the 7 principles of the universal design. And as your center and CEAPAD Center, we share the view of these supporting technologies in different scenarios, like leisure or home care or tourism or mobility or some others. And we typically are asked about more concrete specification of these universal design principles, because we know all of them, but whenever the occupational therapists, the social workers, or some other technicians implied in the development of systems for all ask us about concrete decisions and rules, and it's not easy to go further from that universal principles to some other specific ones. So my question is, according to the experience of your center, are you working or could you focus on more typically local principles to be applied to health, home care, leisure, all the typical scenarios of the information society?
That's a great question, and I think a common challenge that many people who work in our field are trying to accomplish. What are tangible examples of universal design, and how effective are they? That's what much of our research is based on. Our most recent complete project, where we went from the beginning to the end and have done follow-up evaluations in the project, was on a residential hall at the University at Buffalo. The Idea Center was working with the Global Universal Design Commission to develop universal design strategies to implement in building a residential building. So we worked with the architects and planners involved in the building to implement those strategies. Then once the building was built, we went through, the residents moved in, the student residents, and we allowed them to live for over a period of time, become comfortable and use the space with a wide variety of students living in the space, including students with mobility and vision limitations. And so what we did is we asked the students about their experience in the environment, specific features we know that were different from other dormitories and residential halls, and also specific spaces and how they use the space. That was for the people using the environment and comfortable in the space. We also brought through a guided tour of people with various disabilities, people with vision impairment, both minimal to severe vision impairment or in complete blindness. People with mobility, who use mobility devices from scooter to manual wheelchair and power wheelchairs, people with hearing impairment, walking through the building and using different products in the building and evaluating. And we combined all of this with any of the service concerns in the building. So what was working and not working from a functional perspective of the building. And finding out what strategies in our universal design standards are effective and what strategies maybe don't make as much of a difference in the building environment. We see that this might translate into the design of hotels, the design of office spaces, buildings that are similar in character to our residential hall space. So that's in the area of living and the home environment. And in transportation, we are very, very interested in the use of the public transportation system and making that easier and faster and more independent for people with disabilities. So much of our research involves, we work very closely with our local transit authority on the boarding and disembarking of the fixed route bus, the large buses, with the low floor and a ramp in and out of the buses, and evaluating within the large transit system and also the paratransit system, which is a smaller public transportation service that goes door to door for people to take the transportation, but often is more limited in the ways to enter and exit, and the mobility device securement within those vehicles is very dependent upon the driver and the interaction with the driver and the driver securing the person's wheeled mobility device. We're very interested in learning how that experience can be made more independent, and we're working with Qstraint, which is a very popular wheelchair securement company, to evaluate their newest product, which is an independent securement system that involves no hooks or straps. It's an electronically powered device, to see how that might improve transportation, public transportation.
Thank you. Bueno, yo no sé si saben ustedes que tengo aquí.
Thank you. You may not know that right here I have the device that they presented in the MIT session, and I can see your expression on your faces, so I can see you have a question in your mind. So if you want to mention your question out loud, it would be great.
I'll speak in English. Thank you for the three of you for being here, and especially you two coming from the US, Mr. Beckman and Ms. Perez, thank you so much. Ms. Perez, the question is going for you. In your opinion, from working at the center, what are the main areas that the tourism industry needs to improve upon? And my second question is, what is, from your understanding, the US in particular doing in this respect to make tourism more accessible?
I think this is a very interesting topic. First and foremost, I think important in tourism is transportation no matter where you go. You have to get where you're going, whether that's by train, plane, bus, taxi. You need to be able to get where you're going. And some places are very, very good at providing accessible public transportation, and other places it creates the barrier that may prevent people from being able to visit a place. So I think that within the transportation domain, among many others, but specifically within transportation, if people can be confident that when they are going to a new place, the technology and the equipment in use is universal, and no matter the device that they use, or if they can see or they can hear, that they will be able to use a simple transportation system with equipment to keep them safe while they travel. And I think that we're headed in that direction, but I think there are still challenges to overcome because the transit systems can often be very confusing for people with cognitive impairment, even people who don't know the language. If the signs are not simple and easy to use, then it's very difficult to find your way, especially in a complex transit system. So using wayfinding and better technology are ways that we can improve transportation in the tourism sectors. In the United States, I think specifically in the tourism area, I think people rely a lot on the Americans with Disabilities Act and think that because we have these laws, that many of our environments are protected and are accessible for people to use, but we know in fact that it's the bare minimum. The laws really only achieve the bare minimum of accessibility, and we have to improve and implement universal design strategies in order to make places usable for all people. People are changing, populations are getting older and using more assistive devices and have different mobility needs. And people are getting bigger and their devices are getting bigger, and so space needs to be designed and thought of differently. And I think that we have to help educate our major tourism industries in the United States to see the benefits of implementing universal design and how that can impact the tourism economy. Because I think abroad it's done at a much larger level, and it's considered much more important as a part of the economic industries in other countries.
Tenemos otra pregunta por allí, por favor.
Do we have another question? I think we have two questions. Right after this person, we'll give the floor to those other two people over there, okay?
So to Ms. Perez, you as an occupational therapist are in direct touch with the needs of the users, but then services, environments and products are designed by engineers or by designers and operated by business people. How do you think that, or what do you think would be the best way to convey that information about the needs of the users to the designers, so that that knowledge that exists, those principles of universal design and all the research you and your team do, how do you think that they can be conveyed to the designers or the engineers? Thank you.
Thank you for that question. I could hear myself. I think that's a very important question, and I think that involving the end user in the design process is perhaps the most important. And in the universal design standards that we are developing, part of the standards, aside from strategies specific to the environment, is also the process of how you go about the design process. And a part of the recommendations we're making is you must include the end users in the planning meetings. You must have someone who is constantly thinking about these goals throughout the process and evaluating if the goals are being achieved throughout the design process, and recommending the involvement of professionals who work directly with the end users and with a multitude of people to express the different needs that people might have. But even though I work professionally with a wide variety of people as an occupational therapist, my personal experience is very different from someone who has different needs than I have. So most important is that perhaps the designers have the opportunity to meet with the users of the building and to really understand how the building will be used by the people and design for the people, with the people.
Por allí tenemos un par de preguntas más, por favor.
We have a couple of questions from there.
You mentioned that you are developing a new definition or a new for universal design. That is a process. Do you think that there is going to be some challenge for that definition to be implemented in the world? Because I ask that because many people in many countries is still starting to realize the existence of universal design and the original concept, incorporating that concept and that text in laws, regulations, whatever, and also how that new definition and that new set of standards would help to really differentiate between universal design and accessibility, because right now I see that a big problem, a ramp is a universal design and that's it. For many people, talking about accessibility, they think that they are producing universal design.
That brings up a very, very interesting topic for our center. The director, Ed Steinfeld, and my colleague, Jordana Meisel, who has her PhD in human factors engineering, and she's an urban planner, they wrote a textbook about the goals of universal design and this new definition in 2012. And since then, we've been working very hard to spread the definition and the goals of universal design in different environments, and we really have received the feedback that it makes a lot of sense to relate universal design to specific areas of research that have expert researchers and literature that exists to back up the evidence for universal design. And to address the concept of universal design versus accessibility and really the language gaps that exist in that even in different countries, they use different words for accessibility, for universal design, inclusive design, design for all. All of these things are words being used by different people, and how do we have a common language and common strategies that will work? I think that that's a challenge that we continue to work on. At least through our center, we educate about accessibility being the laws and the minimum requirements that we have through the ADA and that make an environment usable, but maybe not promoting participation as much as participation could be and inclusion could be in an environment. So universal design goes above and beyond the standards of accessibility. So we see the concepts as two very different things, and we try to educate that they're very different. Universal design, of course, includes accessibility, but it is not only accessibility.
I would say that.
Tenemos una pregunta más al fondo.
We have another question at the back of the room.
For Ms. Perez, very popular. It was just in relation to your own experience and also the organisation's experience, whether you had any experience on website design as it relates to usability, universal design. I know you've talked about the real-world situations.
I'm having difficulty hearing you, actually.
All right, sorry. It was just, have you had any experience or any academic research or papers around website design?
Website design. We do, specifically in our center, we try to make sure our own materials and websites include accessibility and are designed in a way that are easy to read and navigate. I'm sure we have improvements to make, but our center in the United States is not the main place that does accessible and universally designed web design. In fact, I was just speaking with Robert about a center at the University of Wisconsin that's much more involved in mobile technology and website design and universal design, and they're funded by our same government funding organization, but I would say they're the experts in that area. However, in evaluating different mobile technologies and apps that come through our office and different products, it's one of our major concerns when we have our participants using new products. If the website is not available to them in different formats, or the app is not available to them in the way that they need to use it, then we provide that feedback to the companies that we work with.
Hi.
Bueno, nos quedan 5 minutos y...
We have 5 minutes left, and we have time for one more question only, because later on you will be able to have face-to-face conversation with our speakers.
Service training for accessibility. You said that there is a big gap between physical accessibility, and can you elaborate a little bit on the good practices and your experience with training for accessibility and providing service? Thank you.
Yeah, so specifically about service delivery, like when you have a transaction, or are you talking more about accessibility training to help people understand the needs of a diverse population?
For example, in a hotel, providing training for the staff?
Yes.
Yes, so in that context.
I think that training on universal design would include not just the people designing the hotel or the facilities team in a hotel. It would include all of the people that are going to interact with the guests at the hotel, and better understanding how to communicate effectively with diverse populations, and different ways and resources to provide. In the United States, at least, our hotels have requirements and laws to have different devices and technologies available, and are supposed to have only a certain amount of rooms that are accessible for a person's needs. But universal design approach to a hotel would say all rooms are designed in a way that people can come to the hotel and stay in any room in the hotel, and it should work for you. And if you do have specific technology needs, we have those, and that the staff is trained in a way that understands the needs of a diverse population and doesn't panic or need to have expert assistance, that they're prepared to welcome a diverse population of guests.
Bien, bueno, pues no quisiera terminar la sesión sin darle la palabra por última vez al resto.
I wouldn't want to finish the session without giving the floor to every speaker, so perhaps we could have a 1-minute round of interventions by all of our speakers. And also, by way of conclusion, I would like to establish a link with one topic that emerged with this affordability and accessibility, the link between the two, because when you conceive the expectations, the needs of people who could use the device, and there is a distance from that point to the implementation, build-up, and maintenance of that device, the cost-benefit ratio is determinant, and it's something that will dictate whether more people will be able to enjoy those accessible technologies. So please, in this final minute that you will have by way of conclusions, please share with us a brief conclusion in that sense. Please, Dr. Beckman, Dr. Pez, Dr. Acosta, please share with us what your standpoint is. This is a key issue. The prototype needs to be conceived for users since the earliest stages. Actually, we requested that feedback from the ONCE Foundation so that they could provide all the available information that they have. Our idea is to make available the first prototype as soon as possible so that the real user can validate it. So that they can say, I don't like this, this needs to be changed for me. That is key for projects to be applicable, actually.
So affordability is extremely important, and in fact it is critical to our plan for the BrainPort technology. The current device sells for €8,000. We recognize that this is way too high. In fact, we realize that most people who are profoundly blind are also people who are very poor and cannot afford to pay more than maybe €1,000 or €2,000 for a device out of their own pocket. So it will, in order for our technology to be acceptable and successful, it will require governments to provide support, it will require insurance companies to provide support, and it will require us to bring the affordability of the technology to a level where all people who are profoundly blind are able to afford the technology.
I think that's a very important topic. Many people, the perception, I think, of universal design is that it's expensive, and if you don't have a lot of money, implementing universal design may not be possible. And we don't believe that that's the case. In fact, the cultural appropriateness goal in the goals of universal design really tries to express that universal design strategies can be used in many different ways and implemented in many different types of environments. And our next research endeavors in the next 5 years include following the cost of implementing universal design strategies to give evidence that it doesn't in fact cost too much money or more money than any regular building, and that over time in fact it may save money.
Pues muchas gracias, Leopoldo. Thanks, Robert and Brittany. Gracias a la Fundación ONCE y a los colaboradores y patrocinadores.
Thank you very much, Fundación ONCE. Thank you very much to the organizers and the sponsors for having us for this very interesting panel. Thank you very much also for your attendance, and we will continue to elaborate on these very interesting issues throughout the next sessions. Thank you very much.